Time and a half too, okay?
What? That's what
Oh,
I'm
we're
talking
live.
about.
Hold on. Okay. Hold on, Doc. You're live.
You're listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEGTalkRadio.com. Click live stream tab or watch us live on your smart TV, YouTube, WCEG Network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your host of Mind Matters. We're the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG Network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show host and guest and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support. Good evening. Welcome to Mind Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Wanzo, a psychiatrist practicing in Atlanta for the last 29 years. Our co-host is Officer Paul DesVignes, who has more than 20 years of law enforcement experience. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Doc. Hi, everybody.
And we welcome back our special guest, Norman Carter Jr., a former Army veteran and retired corporal with the Philadelphia Police Department. He wrote a powerful book called The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop. I'm reading the book now and highly encourage you to purchase it on Amazon. This evening, the plan was to do part 3 of our racial violence and mental health, and was to discuss the Rayshard Brooks killing and aftermath. However, some things happened this weekend, Father's Day weekend, that really necessitated us focusing on an often taboo subject. That subject is Black on Black crime. This past weekend, Chicago had a record number of shootings, 102, with 14 deaths, including 5 children. One of the children was a 3-year-old toddler. They had meant to shoot at the father, but got the toddler instead. My 20-year-old cousin, Austin, was killed on Father's Day by gun violence. He had loving parents, was an athlete, a student, and worked. His motto, and this is what he had in his motto on Facebook, I'm always working at being awesome at everything all the time. That was his motto. Let me say again, he said, I'm working at being awesome at everything all the time. He was an awesome young man. The killer was another 20-year-old male who was arrested, and this young man supposedly made a video bragging about the incident. So our topic this evening, what about Black on Black crime? What about Black on Black crime? The term itself is very loaded. It has been used by the right and white supremacists to deflect from the issues of police abuse and from the Black Lives Matter movement. But what I say, there is no reason that we can't acknowledge the Black on Black crime problem and address police abuse. Let me say that again. There's no reason that we can't acknowledge the Black on Black crime problem and address police abuse. So let me start with the guests. I know that Norm, you had some statistics, and Paul too. So Norm, what kind of statistics do you have for us?
Oh, I have plenty, and I'll try not to wear you out with them. I do want to say that as a retired police officer, I have campaigned against both police abuse and black on black crime. I don't think that they're exclusive of one another.
Mhm.
Guess who the victims are in each one that we're talking about?
Us.
Yes, yes. But we can really control among ourselves. But the first part of control is acknowledging, number one, that there is a problem
Mhm.
and be willing enough to deal with it.
Mhm.
So what I did was because I gathered most of my statistics from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports. These are available to the public. Anyone can access them. They go back to like 1969. You can get statistics on.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I found most compelling, and I just highlighted 4 years for this. And that's 2013, 2014, 2017, and 2018. The 2019 statistics aren't available. But we'll just take the year 2013 so you can see the progression. There were 5,723 homicides in 2013. Out of that number, 2,491 were African American or Black, 3,005 were Caucasian or white. The totals are just out of this world. But for white, the offender information on white homicides was 83.49 for whites killing other whites. For blacks, it was 90.12% in 2013 of blacks killing other blacks. But here is the point that's disturbing. As of the 2010 census, which is what we're using for all of my computations, Caucasians are 78% of the American population. African Americans comprise 14% of the population. When you total all the homicides in 2013, 48.14 were committed by white or Caucasian. 47.14 were committed by blacks or African Americans. So even though we are only 14% of the population, we are committing 47% of the homicides. And the statistics are consistent. I can go from there to, and I'm going to jump, but if you want to get more specific, I can, to 2018, where we have a total of 6,570 homicides. The number's going up. Out of that number, 3,315 were homicides that involved white victims. 80.75 of those homicides were committed by white offenders. Black homicides were 2,925, but almost 89% of those were committed by black perpetrators. And then again, when you go to the overall number, again, we're 14% of the population. We committed 48.36% of all homicides in the country. 45.83 were committed by whites. And it's consistent throughout. The numbers only vary by minor percentage. As you can see, the percentage is increasing by small percentage points, but it's not receding. So it's increasing, particularly when you get into black on black crime. I have somewhere around here, I have statistics on just Georgia. I think for 2019, I'm not sure, but you know, this is law enforcement officer. I don't have the Georgia statistics ready available, and they weren't complete because the 2019 statistics aren't complete for anyone. But overall in 2019, there was a drop in all major crimes, and they haven't been able to break it down into the racial sections that we have for these reports. But again, these reports are available to anyone on the internet. Get on the internet and go to the FBI Uniform Crime Reports, and you can also pull those up. And they have statistics that are, I mean, they're very, 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 very detailed statistics.
And Paul, did you have something, some input, Paul, some thoughts?
You know, amazingly, as I hear the numbers, it doesn't astound me, doesn't surprise me, nor does it shock me. When you work the streets long enough, you know, you can tell the statistics by what you see every day. To the average person, those statistics means nothing. UCRs, as those are called, as Mr. Norm said, FBI compiles this information.
UCR?
It's called, yeah, the UCR, Uniform Crime Reports. Every law enforcement agency in the United States must report those to the FBI yearly to get this data. But when you're out here on these streets, mind you, those UCRs don't mean anything to the officers working those streets or the perps committing these crimes. And I could sit there and tell you all these years about here on these streets, the rise in calls and bodies is the actual common denominator that later on get compiled into this data. And one of the most deadliest things you're going to experience in our community is black on black crime that has no regard, not only for their lives, but the lives of others. No one wants to talk about that elephant in the room. Black Lives Matter. It's the catchphrase right now on TV, in the neighborhoods and demonstrations on the paper. But as a black man who's been black all my life, living in black communities, I've never had fear of white, Indian, Hispanic, or any other race. But I always knew the fear and danger of living in my own community, which is predominantly black. And being of West Indian descent, it just doesn't stop in here in the US. Trinidadian by descent, but all West Indians, we know we come from islands that it's very, very dangerous. Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Bermuda, it can go on and on and on. The act of violence among blacks doesn't even end in the US or the Caribbean. You look at all the civil wars and acts of genocide in African countries by dictators such as Idi Amin and Mubay, and you start to realize that, hey, this may not be isolated incidents of violence in any one demographic or country. This is a historical fact that could possibly is part of who we are in our culture, long before slavery came around. I hear so many people say, well, this is a result of black hating themselves because of slavery. Majority of those people making those statements fail to do their research and realize that violence among blacks in our community, as well as violence among Caucasian groups, Anglo-Saxon, don't forget the Vikings, don't forget the Romans, don't forget all these other empires, violence has been a part of human nature since the beginning of time. We progress technology-wise, but we're still very much dangerous to each other on a social level. And economics really doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just who we are as people.
Well, I don't know. I still would say that the whole institution of slavery, systematic racism has inculcated like a hatred of self. So I posit that, you know, that does play a role, not loving ourselves, having low self-esteem and lack of respect for ourselves. And if we have that for ourselves, we'll have that same lack of respect and self-esteem for our fellow African-Americans. So I do think that the whole slavery tradition has played a role in this.
You know what, Doc? That's an easy answer for those who never really experienced life outside the US. That's easy to sit there and say that would probably be an explanation if, but it's not. You know, I have a very multicultural family, and when you start looking at the Nigerian side of it, you quickly realize that, you know, tribalism in Africa, long before slavery, violence among tribes even to this day persists, whether you're Yoruba, Igbo, or whatever. In Nigeria itself, which I consider one of the more progressive African countries, that's the reason we still have genocides. That's the reason we still have the coups in Africa. You look at the Caribbean. Unfortunately, based upon your political system that you're affiliated with, this has been ongoing long before slavery has ever come around. And it's still persistent to this day.
Slavery did exist throughout the Caribbean, though. Slavery did exist throughout the Caribbean.
Yeah, but it didn't persist in Africa prior to tribalism, which is still cultural. And what we got to understand, the violence amongst ourselves has been cultural long before slavery. In the majority of African countries, even long before colonialism and whites themselves come, you had the same thing on a limited basis in the US among the Native Americans. You know, you had those tribes here that were peaceful farming people. You had the nomads, and then you had raiding tribes such as Comanches and Apaches who were very much warlike. You had the same thing in Europe. As again stated, the Vikings and the Romans especially were known as the barbarians. Again, all of these predated slavery as we know this, is transatlantic slave trade. Unfortunately, in America, and since the end of slavery, we make the mistake of thinking, still use that excuse. But at some point in time, even in our own community today, we fail to think or even acknowledge that that's a major problem, and we break that cycle. Slavery, we're looking at past that point, 1865. That 1865 slavery ended.
But hold on, let's stop here a minute. There is something called post-traumatic slavery syndrome, and it has to do with all the remnants of slavery that still exist in our maladaptive behavior today. It's very much a pattern of how we behave. It is something that's been, you know, proved by
Even if we want to use that
slave syndrome.
I hear you, but Doc, we're better educated than we ever were. We have access to, we finally start taking advantage of counseling. We started taking advantage of the intellect of being better, more prosperous for those of us who really decided that we're going to break these cycles. At what point in this life do we start to stop using those excuses, even if it's valid, and realize, say, hey, you know what? We're self-destructive as a race. We're self-destructive community-wise.
I'm not saying that's an excuse or a justification. It's just a way to have some understanding. It's not an excuse or justification. It's just a way to understand what's been going on, not an excuse or justification.
But if we saying that eventually, if we know better, we could do better. And we have yet to reach the point where we have to acknowledge that in our community, regardless of what the post problems were. We have yet to acknowledge in our community, Black on Black violence is a pandemic. And to me, that's even worse than Corona.
And I think it should be declared a public health problem.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think that one of the big issues that we might be missing is that what we are today is we're a product of centuries of being looked upon as less than human. And the sad part about that is that you have many of us have adopted the behaviors of our oppressors, and we accept that, where we have we call each other by dehumanizing names. The MF word, the N word, B word. These all originated in slavery times. So, and because we so easily dehumanize one another, we are able to hurt each other. And I agree with you in point. I was involved in a conversation with a young man from Africa several years ago, and one of my friends was a former soccer star in Nigeria, and I happened to mention his name, and the guy looked at me with a real dirty look and said, "Oh, he's Fanti." And that was the end of the conversation. I mean,
absolutely.
That still goes on, but I even think that if you remember, or you can go back, part of the facilitators of slavery were African tribe chieftains who were, of course, earning money, but facilitating the trade. That they were capturing people from other
Absolutely.
tribes, and then forcing them over to the coast where the slave traders were.
And if you don't mind me interrupting, that's a very important point. Most Black people, especially in the U.S.
Storming here, I got kicked off, so I don't know. I've been gone for a few minutes. I got kicked off.
Well, Mr. Norman made a very good point.
What was the point?
One of them
For
that
that 5 minutes.
prior to, especially the offset of the North Atlantic trade,
Mhm.
African tribes were known to raid other tribes. They supplied Europeans with slaves.
That's true.
And it wasn't just sporadic or just happen for a short period of time. This was consistent for decades, where as America developed, especially in the South, and more labor was needed, what did they do? They turned around, and when there was no more slaves to be taken from other tribes because they were brought to supply, Europeans started taking the ones who were their allies. It's amazing how we don't acknowledge the part that we played in the transatlantic slave trade, especially at its onset. That predates slavery. And that's the foundation that my argument is that, listen, we have long been our own worst enemy. Don't care what anybody says. I go in any neighborhood around the way I'm not from, and them cats hanging on the corner or stepping by, first thing they do, you planning on robbing me before, you're not looking at me as another Black man coming through. You're looking at me as, oh, who this sucker on my ground? Especially if it's any kind of gangland type environment. You may be wearing the wrong colors and get killed because you're wearing something that's offensive to the gang that controls that area. You don't know, you're not into that life. And you think they care? Not at all. So it has nothing to do with post-slavery syndrome as far as I'm concerned. When I'm dealing with that fraction on the street, I see just violence. I see those who look at violence as a way of life. I see those who promote violence. And I see those who look at violence as a way of showing manhood and strength versus saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to put that same energy to making my neighborhood better. I'm going to put that same energy.
Well, I was going to say that, maybe we need to take a lesson from the 60s, because by the time when I came out to service, 63, 64, 65, the late 60s, early 70s, when you walk down the street and you saw another African-American male, you dressed him as, hey, brother, how you doing? Even if you didn't know his name, it was, hey, sister, how are you? You kept it moving. Everybody spoke. Everybody gave the little
black power
salute right on, and kept moving. And that was one of the greatest times that I can remember, where you actually felt what my friend used to call that mutual understanding and kinsmanship. And over the years, we've lost that. So again,
hey, you know what's ironic, if you don't mind me cutting
right here,
that came right after the major struggles among the 1968, the riots for civil rights, and when we were in a position where, for the first time ever, we were victimized by the system as a whole, and we came together. The assassination of Martin Luther King, the demise of Martinette. James Brown said it right. Say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. And what happened since then?
We lost it.
We became each other's worst enemies.
We lost.
I think a lot of it has to do with the culture. I think the culture with the music, the violent videos, violent rap, I think that plays a role in some of the cultural aspects. I do think that plays.
And it does, but it shows that at some point, we were consistent for even for a minute, realizing, hey, you know what? Self-love is more important than whatever any agenda we was facing or did face with, including slavery. For just that point in time, we were unified enough, like you said loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. But it's funny, I hear old people say to me all the time, the worst thing that happened to Blacks in America was integration. Once we became part of the have and have nots in a major way with integration. Those who were economically able to, we moved away from predominantly Black neighborhoods, Black stores, Black doctors and judges, and moved into white neighborhoods with pretense we're giving our families a better life. But the pretense, this is how we judge how we accomplish something or we get an American dream by moving to neighborhoods that we were once not allowed to be in.
I'm going to have to differ with that because I lived through that. I went to an elementary school where the school books reused, and this was 1960, 1958, 1960. They were 30 and 40 years old. Those were the school books because there was no money being put into schools in minority neighborhoods. So what busing and integration did was it allowed us to have access to the schools that other children had. I'm a perfect example, and I'm not bragging on myself. I went to a very special school. I went to West Point Prep School, it's United States Military Academy Prep School.
Okay.
In my high school, I was 65 in my high school out of 300 and some odd graduates. When I got to West Point Prep School, I was so far behind. The kids that lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and went to better schools, or the kids that lived up in Wisconsin or up in Boston, and up in New England, so far behind because our schools didn't provide the materials that we needed. And that's what integration was. Integration was to put us on a level ball field. And now I think it's I hate to say it that people who now say that integration was the worst thing never lived under segregation.
Now, this is where I got to ask the question.
Even I grew up in the North. Even the North was segregated.
Yes.
Our town was very segregated. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Blacks could only live in one area. In fact, Hank Aaron, who played for the Braves at the time, was the only Black who was allowed to live in the suburbs. All other Blacks, no matter what you did, had to live in the same area. He would bring his kids into our neighborhood to play. The school, if I had gone to the school in my neighborhood, I wouldn't even been get into college. They didn't offer any foreign languages, no advanced math, sciences. So I transferred to an all-white school on the other side of town, because if I had gone to school in my neighborhood, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Wow.
And see, here's the paradox of that I find ironic listening to both of you, because I'm of that generation that just came after all of that, so we never saw that. But these same school system, predominantly back in the inner city schools, ever since then, got budgets out of this world. I'm going to use Atlanta public schools as my point, for example, here. Now we have Black superintendents, what we have for the last 20, 30 years. We have budgets that's some of the highest budgets in the state. Our superintendent and the staffs are making astronomical salaries, but yet in all our major inner city schools, United States of America, we got first rate materials, we got budgets out of this world, and yet we still have the lowest graduation rates of all races. We have the lowest retention of students of quality of all. How is it we went from the 60s, where we had to integrate in other communities to get a quality education, so now we control that education system? We have budgets that give us the funding, and we have dedicated teachers, but at the same time, we have the lowest graduation rates of all the racial groups. Somebody explain that one to me.
Well, I think there's a danger, and I hear just quoting your words, in us segregating ourselves. And what you mentioned is that we have Black superintendents and Black principals. Why aren't we getting the best, whether they're Black or white? Why are we shortchanging ourselves? The other part of that is you have to remember that the Atlanta public school system had one of the biggest scandals in the nation, where the teachers weren't teaching, they were cheating and shortchanging the students. Therefore, you have low graduation rates, and then you have children who are unprepared when they come out of high school to go to college, to go to technical school,
12
even
years
to get a
that took
job.
place. And
do you know what that does? 12 years? That's a lot.
That is a lot. It is really a lot. And for you and I in a position of law enforcement officer, that means we're going to have more felons to deal with. We got 12 years of kids who've never learned the basics. But even more importantly, that is another aspect of Black on Black crime that we refuse to acknowledge in our communities.
Oh, yeah.
And the sad part about it, we can sit there and look at every major inner city school system in the United States of America that heavily funded Black leadership that's really committed to Black communities, yet we're still failing. It's a national trend. Something is going on, yet we have yet to figure out how to break the cycle.
Well, I tell you one thing is that works against us is that it's looked upon as a weakness for people who have mental health problems to go seek that aid. So those people remain in our communities untreated, causing chaos. That's really huge. And the other part about that makes me very uncomfortable. I've been an activist ever since I was 18 years old. And I do not subscribe to the belief that we are what we are and we just can't get any better. Or that there's something intrinsically wrong with us that doesn't allow us to function on a higher plane. What happens culturally, and this is part of, I don't know, part of the culture that we live in. Some people become too satisfied with just enough. This starts with the child. You teach a child that you're not going to go any further than this. So don't even aspire to be any higher than this. This is ingrained and taught.
Lack of discipline in the household.
Lack of discipline. But it's not just in the household, lack of discipline in learning, in studying.
Yes.
You can't study, you can't learn if you got the radio blasting or you're sitting there watching TV. Some geniuses can do that, but for the most of us, we can't. And those are skills that are taught. But the other part of that is, and I've seen this even in my own family, where you have kids with certain problems where they even need some aid. And what do? They give them drugs. And rather than dealing with the problem, they deal with the symptom. And that can be a problem. And yes, there is because as a police officer, I know and have been a witness to the preponderance of Black on Black crime. But again, it's what we settle for. If people didn't settle for it, it wouldn't happen. If people didn't protect bad people, it wouldn't happen. It would be less. If we looked at ourselves, not as N's or B's or MFs, but as human beings, it would improve. But when you consistently, generation after generation, you hear your comedians on television, what do they call you? They call you the N-word. And what do? You laugh at it. It's funny.
We laugh.
It ain't funny. It's not funny because that's part of the dehumanizing process that we
absolutely.
And it's all
Dr. Cress Welsing, who passed, she's a psychiatrist. That's one of the things that she said. We're the only race of people on the earth who use terms to dehumanize ourselves and call ourselves the N-word and H and bitch and all of that. We're the only group of people that do that. And that does dehumanize us in our own eyes and when we see other people who look like us.
Yes.
And the amazing thing about it, we do it with pride. We
Yes.
do it with such pride. And it's funny, we don't even care to company with, we would sling words like that around like in an all Caucasian, Indian, Hispanic. We don't care who's around because we quick to say, well, we could say that because we the one. And yet, if you say it so much, where is you got to think you got the right to be upset with others who may say it? Well, it's different when we say it. No, it's not. It's the same thing to me.
Right. It is.
Mhm.
The thing.
It's amazing, like you just said. No, I love comedy shows, and I admit I'm laughing my butt off. I've never been to a comedy show, a black comedy show where the N word ain't prevalent. There are whites in the audience, there are other races, and yet we they come into our surroundings hearing that word used so generously and freely that even when they use it, they're like, hold it, what did I do wrong? Y'all do it all the time.
Mhm.
Y'all say it all the time.
Mhm.
It's amazing what we pick and choose to defend our so-called Black Lives Matter. Right now, I can't support the Black Lives Matter for the bare principles what they're saying. I understand the philosophy that we have the right to live to be a ripe old age as anyone else. But to me, we want everybody else to understand that, but ourselves, we won't acknowledge that amongst ourselves. We here to show tonight to really focus on black on black crime,
Mhm.
specifically homicide.
Mhm.
At what point we even acknowledge that we do a better job at eliminate ourselves than the Klan ever did?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm constantly dealing. Well, Norm,
Mhm.
homicides in our community it's the hardest to solve,
Mhm.
and not because there's not enough information. It's because it's so
Snitch.
hard to get witnesses. Oh,
Snitch. The snitch
we
thing.
don't
I'm not gonna
snitch.
be a
Yep.
snitch. Right. A snitch.
You know, we don't snitch now. We don't talk to
Mhm.
police. It's funny how nobody wants the police in our communities until they get victimized, and then they mad because where were you?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Y'all ain't starved yet. Somebody killed my uncle, brother, cousin.
Mhm.
Y'all ain't do nothing. It's funny because the very people that you would snitch on, who now victimize you, nobody else in that community is snitching on.
Mhm.
The cycle keeps going. Comedians, again, let's get back to like Norm said. We laugh and joke. We don't snitch in our community. We don't do this. We don't do that. At what point do we realize nobody reinforces the cycle of violence in our lives stronger than we do?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Someone asked a question on Facebook. They want to know what responsibility do the parents have? Do parents have in all of this?
That parents have?
Mhm.
Oh my God. Let me tell you, I grew up in a good old fashioned West Indian household. Let me tell you, discipline was absolute. The police didn't scare me, my parents did. So you ask what responsibility? Parents sending kids to school now. When the school teachers report negative acts by the kids, parents want to come there and fight. The parents acting a fool. The parents sitting there probably just as crazy as the kids are and take no responsibility now of saying, hey, I have to do a better job with my kids in my household. We refuse to acknowledge as parents, we're not our kids' friends.
Mhm.
We
Yes.
don't even know where our kids at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, where they on the street, who they with. Isn't that crazy?
I have some
Where,
patients who the kids and the patients do drugs together. They actually do. The patients
Mhm.
and their kids do drugs together.
Yes.
wow.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, they do drugs together.
Yes.
Now, I've dealt in them households where everybody's smoking weed, including kids.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they don't have a problem with that.
Mhm.
But yet, when this kid get locked up for out there wilding out, robbing and shoot, parents be the first to sit there and tell them, "Oh, he a good kid," or so. I mean, y'all just want to set him, but all your kids in jail, including half your family, uncle, brother, cousin. To them, that cycle is so normal to them that they quick to blame everybody but themselves.
I,
At
I,
what point do we say this makes no sense?
I
Talk to
think
me, brother Noah.
I think that one of the things that Dr. Wanzo started off this program about her cousin
Mhm.
with the 20-year-old male with the 35-year-old father,
Mhm.
you can't have children raising children.
Exactly.
And that's a huge problem. The disintegration of what we used to call the family.
Mhm.
Sitting around the dinner table with the family at dinner time. Lost art, lost trait. Those things mean so much, because what you need to start teaching children when they're very, very young, thank goodness my parents did it, they weren't perfect,
Mhm.
but self-esteem.
Exactly.
That starts very, very young. The first lesson my parents taught me was, nobody is better than you, whether they're white or black. You're as good as anybody else. I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed it. I believe it to this day, that that I'm on an equal plane, or can be on an equal plane with anyone. And that all starts very young with your self-esteem, because when you lose your own self-esteem,
Mhm.
you'll go and do anything.
Exactly.
Anything. You can, yeah. That includes everything from being a thief to being a prostitute.
Mhm.
There you go.
Once you
You're
lose that
impressionable.
self-esteem, yes.
Mhm.
And what so many of our Black communities don't understand, whether these misguided youth or these felons for life adults, streets don't give loyalty to nobody.
Mhm.
Nobody will ever beat the streets.
Mm-hmm.
The street is that subculture that's equivalent to the system.
Mhm.
It's a no-win. You will never, ever, ever beat the system, nor will you ever beat the streets. Your smartest, how to say, individuals and communities, which regardless of what side that you're on, is learning how to make them streets work for you and working with it. Then you're truly on a path to something. Because most people don't like to admit it, but probably one of the shrewdest of our Black community that's made a difference in terms of using the system and the street to his advantage. Like I throw the name out, is Don King. Don King may not have the morals or scruples that most of us would expect from somebody of this stature, and Lord knows he doesn't. But he has learned to work the system. And that is one of those Black Americans that never hesitate to say, God bless America. Where else can a convicted felon in manslaughter still come out and still be the most powerful the boxing promoter in the world? On the flip side, another great Black American who has learned to work the system, but he was a true champion of the people, was Marion Barry. Care what nobody says, Marion Barry was one of the greatest Black mayors ever, because he never isolated himself from the people in the street, the lowest common denominator. He wasn't pimping for votes when time comes. Marion Barry stayed in touch with those people in the street, and they never, ever, ever lost loyalty to him right up to the end. Two individuals on opposite sides of the street, been through the system, been through the streets, and you got to ask yourself, how did they succeed when the deck was stacked against them long after they became convicted felons? To me, that's intriguing, because something they did right to learn this system and make it work.
So how do we reach these young brothers on the streets who are just, killing us every day? I mean, it's, frustrating.
I used to sit there and think we had all these programs, and Norm can back me up with it. Officer Friendly, DARE programs, Steer Straight. Everybody had their different version, especially in the more violent of the Black community, that we used to sit there and think that we were doing something for. You assign the officers or the personnel to who are more nurturing and motherly, and thinking that, oh, they're going there and they'll be kind. Really, you look back at it now, what percentage of those actually work? You got any idea, Noah? Help me
Well,
here with this one.
I had this question posed to me earlier this week, and I remember as a youngster, one of the saving graces that we had in my little poor North Philadelphia neighborhood we had PAL, the Police Athletic League. We
Yes,
had
sir.
What
we
is
had
PAL? What is
the
PAL?
Police Athletic League,
Okay.
where kids could go in and join. They taught boxing, all kinds of sports, basketball.
Yep.
We had a very active Department of Recreation that actually went into the neighborhood and organized little teams of different sports. I used to participate in track meets. They did all kinds of sports. That didn't cost a lot of money because there wasn't a lot of money in those days. But
Exactly. With dedication.
right. But once you take away access to outlets where children can feel good about themselves, going back to self-esteem, you begin to have problems because the kids who didn't get involved in sports, they were on the corners.
Absolutely.
They were sneaking up the state, standing next to the state store, trying to get somebody to buy them a fifth of Thunderbird, so they could come out and go stand in the alley and drink. Those are the kids who are out in the corner smoking, because you get caught up in that sneaking mentality. Whatever I can do to sneak, that's the kind of self-esteem I want. That's my getting over. That's part of that street thing, getting over, and not having friends. And this is the one thing I try to teach my children. When you have friends, when you just look for friends, establish friends who are going somewhere, who are thinking progressively, friends who are talking about, well, I want to go to this college, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a policeman, or I want to be a fireman. Those type of things. When you associate with those type of people, good things happen because you get caught up in the wave, and that's your conversation. I experienced this in my own neighborhood. I grew up on a very, very poor neighborhood. Half the block, they're either bums or jailbirds, even the ones who are alive today. The guys that I associated with, a little small section of my block, I've got 3 high school principals, 2 police officers, several people in the medical field, either in pharmacy or working in hospitals. But our conversations weren't like the kids on the other end of the block. Our conversations were, we're going to get out of this someday.
Yes.
And that's why I hate to buy into that. And that's what happens when you associate yourself with, I'm gonna call them bad people, is that your life goals are lower. You need to be around people with goals who are trying to go somewhere, even if you're poor, as long as you have a dream and you focus on that dream and people are not stepping on your dream and telling you can't get there. You're going to be, you reach for the sun, maybe you only get to the moon, but it's better than being right down here on the ground. Those are the type of things that need to be instilled in our young people, because when you get to be 15, 16, 17, 18, the die is cast.
Yes,
Not,
it is.
not that there's no redemption, because there can be, but there's so far to go with an 18-year-old who's going astray. It takes so much to bring him back to where he needs to be a progressive human being. Where when you start, there's an old saying they used to teach us in elementary school, and it began, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree, which means that you start young. You can't wait until they get 18, 19, 20 years old and say, oh, I'm going to change this child. I'm going to make this young man better. It's a very, very difficult road to climb. So everything starts young, and sadly, it starts with family. And when you don't have the family support, the family nurturing, it's easy to go astray, because what happens is your heroes and your peers may not be the people who have your best interest at heart.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. And to piggyback off Norm said, police athletic leagues were so amazingly important because that was the essence of community policing. These kids, like myself, grew up in the neighborhood, knew the cops by names.
Yeah.
So who
You-
paid for that? Who paid for that?
That
was
was
a
part
city
of the
budget.
budget. Yeah.
Part of the police budget.
And we had dedicated officers. I remember their names, Smitty and all of them, when I was a kid. Do you realize now that, even here in the metro area, most agencies don't have a power league, or if they did, it's only in name paper form only because no one actively administrates it or use it, and they missing the opportunity to connect with the youth of the street by community policing on a basic level. Norm hit it right on the head. Again, I grew up in inner city neighborhood, rough as that could be, but between Powell and the YMCA, we had a lot of places and we had dedicated adults. First, we had the neighborhood that everybody grandma was somebody's mother.
Mhm.
We had police officers who were black that and white, not to say that
Mhm.
crazy thing, that knew where you lived, knew your parents, and would not hesitate to take you home. You didn't get shot, you didn't get locked up. They took you home because they knew what you're gonna get at home was worse what they can administer on the street.
Mhm.
Like Norm said, when
Yes,
we
sir.
started getting away in the 70s, 80s, going into the 90s, we became more violent against ourselves. Even the officers that used to work the beat couldn't deal with that anymore because they had just as much chance of being victimized at the brothers on the street. You take home the parents now, parents cuss you out. Or how you know it's my kid? Well, back in the day, you was more afraid of being taken home than you was going to jail.
Dr.
Police,
Wanzo, who's, excuse me, I want to jump in because
Sure.
something that you said is that if you read my book, that towards the beginning, there's you read about the idealism that I came on the job with and that I still maintain to this very day. But one of the things that hurt me the most was there were two incidents at the very early in my career where large crowds of black people turned on me. And I said
mm,
to myself, I came on this job to help these people. Why are they turning on me when I'm trying to help make their neighborhood better? Doing things, I mean, it was, they all involved crimes. And I'm not talking about 5 or 6 people. I mean, there was one incident with about 30 young people and another one that was about 40 or 50. And I'm standing in the middle of the crowd. Number one, I'm scared. And I'll deal with fear a little bit later. But uh, the other question was in my head was, why are they turning on somebody who's trying to help them? I to this day, it doesn't make sense to me. Uh, and I really wanted to. This is part and parcel of what we're talking about. When we and I mentioned on the last program about one of the things that hurts us in our communities is, and we're talking about white police officers in the neighborhood, which shouldn't be a problem. But one of the things that you have is uh, a lot of these cops are afraid, and
exactly.
when you're afraid, you do things that aren't maybe good, but it's a feeling. But I found that it's more than just a feeling, Doctor and Paul. I did a pulled out statistics again from the Uniform Crime Report, another subject nobody wants to talk about. From 2010 to 2019, 511 police officers were murdered. 511 police officers were murdered. Of those police officers murdered, 442 were white.
Wow.
55 were black. That,
Wow.
my friends, is not just a feeling. Those are
That's a
facts.
reality. Yes.
Yes,
Numbers don't lie.
yes. And people, that's a subject that people don't want to talk about. Now, I didn't get into who the offenders were. That's not really relevant right now.
I
What?
understand we had a caller, whoever the caller is, if you can call back, that we had a caller who
Oh,
put up.
mhm.
So caller, please call back. Okay.
Okay.
You know, it's funny.
Mhm.
White police officers were more likely to be killed by white subjects, especially during the onset to the 20s and 30s when prohibition, lawlessness, let's not even talk about the days of the Wild West, when it was truly white on white crime, because it's very rare for a black man to kill a white man during those times, it even remotely expect a trial. You went straight to a lynching. But it's amazing how since the change of civil rights, how that had changed so much. And Norm is right. I worked with some amazing white dudes all my years, and you might as well say they were black inside because they were cool, knew everybody in the neighborhood. And I'm going to say this, well, absolutely didn't have a prejudice bone in their body. Why? Because a lot of them end up with black spouses, and it's not because they were trying to fit in, because there's such a thing as saying somebody who's cool. No, he's not corrupt. He's not that. He's cool. He's the type that comes in with no bias, or even she, no animosities, no racial issues, and they do is this. That's the reason I have to protect my white brothers and blue, who everybody want to jail. Oh, all white officers are racist.
Yeah, not true. Not true.
Man, I had some cats who they more comfortable around the way than I am. Knew everybody. Everybody loved them. They go to house, they go to call. Hell, you go to certain calls, they be like, "Where's Smitty? Or where's so and so?" Well, I want to talk to you because he understands us. And we black on black, and they don't want you.
Right. Right.
So I want to get the number out to call for someone that wants to call. The number to call is 646-876-9923. Again, 646-876-9923. The meeting ID is 817-1765-3611. Again, the meeting ID is 817-1765-3611, and the password is 626-107. Again, the password is 626-107.
Let me just say this as a footnote. One of the things that's truly affecting the Black community in terms of Black Lives Matter with other racial groups is, to me, and this is my personal opinion, we fail to acknowledge that racism ain't always going to be the excuse that we tend to use it to be. I know racism exists. I'm not naive in thinking that there's not biases and prejudice out there, but it's not always justified, especially when we are the instigators. And once we have to face the consequences, then we want to be the victims. We got to start taking responsibility for our own action, not only as individuals, but as a community too. Parents need to stop going to schools, attacking teachers, report the problems with teachers. Our Black politicians need to start doing the job that we elected them to be. They want to be more celebrities than leaders in our community. Our religious leaders need to get back to being foundations of our community instead of celebrities themselves. Or in some cases,
we have a caller. Is it a caller? I understand we have a caller. Caller?
Yes.
Yeah, who's the caller?
Yes.
What's your
Yes, this is the caller. Yes.
Uh-huh.
How are you doing today, sir?
Hi, this is Charles Reeves. I'm calling you from Fairfax, Virginia. How you doing,
Charles.
Norman?
Fine, Charles. How are you?
Good. I tried several times to get in. A very good discussion. I've read Norman's book, outstanding work. I call him the Black Serpico. I listened. Norman and I are in the same family, okay, and so we've had these discussions privately as well. I wanted to just offer a couple of thoughts and ask some learned questions from you experts. One, and I wrote them down. In terms of the Black on Black crime, okay, we understand it's Black on Black crime. What percentage of that crime is like organized gang related, turf wars, Crips versus Blood sort of stuff, or territory fights versus random criminal acts, all types?
I wish I had that question before I started pulling up my stats.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'm sure it's in there, but I would have to look it up because the tables, there are 24 different tables to look at for each
I
particular
see.
offense. And I just didn't think to look that up, but that's a good question.
Okay, I have
In the
a
back
follow-up
law,
question.
yes.
I have a follow-up question for that, and then I'm going to be quiet and let you all kind of say what you have to say. But with respect to that, if it is found that most of the black-on-black crime, especially like in Chicago, we hear about the crime, the shootings every weekend, blah, blah, blah. The same in Detroit, same as Oakland, here in Washington, D.C., same thing. If it's found that, say, 40 or 50 or 60% of it is gang-oriented, I'm thinking about some of the Elliot Ness untouchables of the Prohibition period, where the government sent in armies of G-men and they just went in and took Capone out, went after him and got him.
Yeah.
Not possible today. Okay.
Well,
And he
first of all,
he
you
went to
gotta-
jail for income tax evasion. They didn't kill him, but he went to.
never got convicted of any of the murders that he ordered. And
No.
again, that's what most people don't understand. To deal with gangs, most people don't understand what's known as the RICO Act. And this is
Okay.
what's developed specifically for racketeering among gang membership. In organized crime, the RICO Act was used as the main tool because most mafia bosses did not go to jail for murders they committed or ordered. It's because of tax evasion, money laundering, and other offenses. And Norm would back me up on this. That first part you stated about in terms of gangs and the randomness of the crime, keep in mind, open gang warfare is easy to solve those homicides. Why? Because this is gang on gang. They had a beef as is known now. There's such a generalized term that even on mainstream TV, they use it as a joke. Oh, I got a beef with somebody. Again, we are already supporting and reinforcing stigmatized that's cool in our community. Well, you look at gang violence outside of gang on gang, random shootings and killings, robberies. Norm is right in saying that that's a statistic that is probably not even tallied, much less looked at, because why? It's so difficult to really determine what was gang related in terms of the randomness of it. Gangs are not going to tell on themselves, well, I killed that person because of its initiation. Why I did this, why I did that. The sad part about it, when you ask why we can't take gangs out the way it looked like on TV, well, because again, that worked for TV. There's certain dramatizations of it. And the reality of it, even gang members have due process. We have a constitution, we have a system, and we have very good lawyers who make wonderful lives, incomes, protecting and representing gang members and other organized figures of crime. And don't think for a second they are not well represented, and they beat more cases than they're convicted of, believe it or not.
I in my own personal experience in Philadelphia, this is prior to even my being born. They used to have a squad in Philadelphia called the Dick Anderson Squad. And that squad used to go around and break heads
Nice.
and break up gangs. But coming up into the 70s, and Charles, you could probably relate to this, we had a gang that controlled criminal activity in both Philadelphia and DC. It was called the Junior Black Mafia. And and what happened, the way that they got rid of them, number one, by RICO, that was number one. But number two, they started enforcing laws that were on the books and maybe created a couple of other ones. And now people looking back at that, when we had communities in Philadelphia and Washington and in Baltimore under siege, and the people were screaming for relief, and the government came in there and got them that relief. And now you had people who don't know history are calling that mass incarceration. And what happened
There you
is
go.
what happened in the 70s and the late 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, they went in and got these drug dealers out there in jail. The ones who aren't dead, they're in jail and they're doing life terms in prison. That's no, go ahead.
You made me think of Young Boys Incorporated in Detroit and the stress officers that took them out.
Yes, we had Black Brothers Incorporated in Philly. Same thing.
Yeah, and it was the same concept. They used juvenile drug dealers that were going to be treated in juvenile courts, you know, and but they went at them hard and they cleaned them out. Now Detroit has its issues now, but for at least maybe a good 8 to 9, 10-year period of time, they made them disappear.
Yes.
And the sad part about it, the very community that was under siege, got to understand, whether they juvenile or adult offenders, and I'm talking hardcore gang members, I'm talking open warfare, open drug market. These were sons, daughters, uncles, cousins, aunts, brothers, the very people in this community. When that community started being victimized by its own, that's when it finally turned to the system, and the no snitching didn't apply anymore, because the open murders and the daily body counts, everybody yelling something had to be done. This is where we at right now, and again, believe it or not.
So what I'm getting
matter. What I'm trying to say is, when we took away the units that were designed specifically to break that cycle, I worked in such unit, you know, we would term crime suppression. That's all we went after, street level drugs, guns, and gangs. Were the methods always pretty? Absolutely not. Why? Because you had to use your officers who were street smart, to say the least. Not your pretty polished, you know, textbook or their wonderful example. Not them. That's when you let them pit bulls out. And if you want to clean up a neighborhood from the worst drug, you got to let them pit bulls out. Unfortunately, letting them pit bulls out, you're going to have accusations of civil rights violation. You're going to have accusations of police brutality. You're going to have accusations of now the very community that wanted you to come in and help. It's now the community that's saying why you had to do it like that. Yeah, we have yet to find a more effective way. First, unfortunately, force on force in the street is the first step toward getting respect and making respect. Is it pretty? Absolutely nothing. But nobody wants to do the dirty work. And that's the reason we keep having this reoccurring cycle every couple of generations. We refuse to understand that you can't have your cake and eat it too. You will always have and have nots in our society, no matter what your race, color, creed, religion. There will always be have and have nots. A legal business cannot even remotely survive without the support of legal business. I've yet to see a drug dealer turn around and build their own Mercedes. They make all their money, and then they go to a dealership, and the dealership would be happy to take 100,000 cash under the table and supply them with that car. So when we start talking about how we are going to be able to eradicate that section of our community that victimizes our community, no, listen, support me on this one, but here's where the complete cycle of every stakeholder have to take responsibility for being part of that change. Parents first, knowing where your kids at, who they socializing with, and the activities that they do, good or bad. Educators now have to start identifying these kids in our school system who are gang leaders, who are drug sellers, and now have effective policies, not only that we're removing them from our schools, but also having cooperation with law enforcement and the parents to document these acts. Our religious leaders have to now start investing a lot more into these communities and help root out that element that's never going to be good. Everybody can't be saved. And sometimes prayer ain't going to be enough. Politicians, do your job. Come in these communities. Start to know these communities to the extent that they don't only see you when it's time election. And yes, I'm one of those who don't think there's such thing as an honest politician. There's very few that I respect because of their lack of responsibility to us. Now we come to law enforcement. Community policing is the very basis of a law enforcement agency. And any department that think traffic enforcement or making your numbers by drug arrest or being intimidated is your way of controlling the community, you are wrong. Community policing means getting out these cars, start making these fat cops responsible for getting themselves back in shape. That if you got to chase a suspect, instead of you trying to shoot a tape, then you can run him down. Start getting the name of residents, the kids paddle athletically. Start deciding, making the decision that we're going to walk our beats. On the beats that need walking, we're going to get more bike patrols. We don't need any more cars out there writing tickets. What's the point of writing 100 tickets, even though we claim we don't have quotas, but we have people get robbed at gunpoint, got homes being broken into, and even more so, if we run a speed traps, all we doing now is alienating the community again because they're scared to drive in their own neighborhood because of getting tickets. Let's start being a lot more accountable to the very people that we're responsible for protecting. Then we'll see a change in all of these drug gangs and everybody else.
May I ask another question, which would have been the second set of questions that you kind of touched on it when I was trying to figure out how to get into the call. You mentioned earlier, or the panel mentioned earlier, about the whole issue of parenting or lack thereof, or parenting skill or lack of parenting. So I'm paraphrasing you. A lot of these kids are coming from very difficult situations. Sometimes the mother's a crackhead and a hooker, right? You just don't know. I mean, sometimes they're gangsters. You just don't know. Sometimes they're just ne'er-do-wells. Sometimes they're just uninterested. Sometimes they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They just don't have time to focus, you know. But in either case, though, my question, like I recall, I'm 63 years old, and so my father has a 5th grade education, and I got 3 college degrees, including the MBA from the University of Michigan. And I didn't really have anybody at home telling me about Wall Street, but they told me about education, and they kind of instilled that in us. But there was a lot of really good after-school programs that, like I was in junior achievement when I was in high school, 10th grade. And we won awards. Yes, I was in junior achievement. I was on the debate team. I was in the drama club. I was in the choir. And then I ran track. And so there was a lot of stuff for us to do to burn off that energy and give you something to do that you could be an achiever and be proud of, even if you weren't really that good of a student.
Self-esteem.
And so
you sound like Dr. Wanzo. She was in everything too.
Yes.
Well, you know, the thing is that, and I never took the SAT either. Okay. I had to go to a community college because I had a low GPA, because I had some, learning disabilities coming up, and some other issues related to that, some, kind of long medical stuff, right? Well, anyway, so I went to community college and did really well. Didn't do so well in my high school years, but I was a great athlete. And I transferred to Howard, and that's how I got in there without the SAT, because my community colleges were regionally accredited. Now, they have some really good programs at the local community college in Flint, Michigan, which is my hometown. And
Can I
so,
support you on that?
Yes.
And that's a great point you just brought up.
Right.
When I got hired and went to the police academy, I spent a year as a recruit, you're a gopher basically. But I had a GED. I never finished high school.
Oh, really?
I was one of those who could not, again, bad choices, bad influence growing up around the way. There was not a lot of positive influences, including parents coming to this country. They were working so much that I grew up on these streets. And unfortunately, by the time they realized that, where my true influence was, I was impressionable, it was too late. You had a great point. I ended up not finishing up high school, but I took the GED, did very well, and I did Manchester Community College as well in Manchester, Connecticut. When I went to the police department, you know, it's funny, I got my GED through going to community college. But it's
Right.
funny because within 3 years of being patrol in the department, I got selected to go to IT, which is instructor school.
Yes.
I enjoy it. And just to tell you just how much you said it's about the program and those who see potential in you more than just being a SAT or ACT score, I was every step of the way constantly like, man, listen, there's something about you. I want you to go to. When I went to IT, majority of the officers or personnel selected to be instructor had, at the very minimum, an undergrad, some had master's degrees. I was the only one filling out the background package during the selection. What's your highest level of education? A GED.
Wow.
I think that one thing that Charles brought up that I think is so important, and we talked about it earlier, is in spite of the environment, there was self-esteem.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
there's just so, that is just so important. But and I didn't want to get away from him, but it just was a question brought up earlier about how do we just take the change in images in movies with pimps, drug dealers, violence in other races, going back to self-esteem. When I was growing up, you didn't see any pictures with black criminals. All the criminals that I saw on television when I was a kid were white. I don't see white kids saying, you know what, I want to be like Edward G. Robinson in Little C. You know, but that was a great movie. Or I didn't want to be part of, I saw the movie Murder Incorporated. I didn't want to be part of that. It was entertainment. And we go back to self-esteem. When you have a sense of self-esteem, good self-esteem, you're not going to gravitate towards a lifestyle of those negative images.
Exactly.
Well, you raise an interesting point, if you don't mind me interjecting, because I came out of high school in the early 70s, 71 through 74, and that was right exactly when Superfly came out, Shaft, Coffee, Shiva Baby, Blackula, the Mac. What was the other one? I mean, it was just like, I mean, we had a ball. We had two theaters in downtown Flint. The Capitol Theater was the white theater. You could go see Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You could see the Beatles' Help. You could see James Bond, Moonraker. But the Capitol, that was the black theater. And that's where you got to see all the black movies and all that stuff. Everybody started straightening their hair like Ron O'Neal and Superfly. Yes, and they were running around with these crazy capes and all that stupid. And you're talking about 15, 16-year-old kids. And that movie
became the image.
That was the image right there. And then you had, like, if you remember the movie The Mac with Max Julian and Vanetta McGee.
Yes. Hey, Goldie was the man.
Goldie. If they wanted to be Goldie. And I mean, I know one kid that got killed, murdered. He ended up trying to be a pimp and they ended up murdering him. But I mean, and everybody was trying to look, I wasn't, but I mean, they were trying to look like Goldie, you know, and look like, Priest and Superfly. So I do believe that.
What's funny?
Yeah, go ahead.
No. And I love when you bring that up because believe it or not, the pimp was the #1 criminal in the black community back in the day. He was looked upon. He was the man. The pimp.
Also, remember the literature that we read, right?
Yes, sir.
Trick Baby, Richard Beck, the story of Iceberg Slim. Remember Donald Goines, Horse Son. You know, remember? I mean, all of those were real popular in the 70s, especially the story of the white Negro, Iceberg Slim, Robert Beck. That ended up being made into a movie years and years later. But people were reading that stuff like it was the Bible.
And then they were so impressioned living that lifestyle on the streets.
That
became our new value system.
Right.
That's when we started getting away from looking at what was in our community that was positive. Because now we have all these influences that were negative. And the funny thing about it, that was in your generation. You know what? My generation, why, and that was transitional because y'all had the pimps who was the main player. And my generation, New Jack City.
Yeah, so, someone
New
asked
Jack
Facebook.
City was the movie, and then
Oh,
everybody wanted.
yeah. I mean, I saw.
That's when the
Yeah.
drug dealer
Yeah, so
became.
someone is saying, right, so what do we do to change these images in the movies of pimps, drug dealers, violence, when other races aren't portrayed that way, and the fact that we emulate these images? So what can we do, you know, about
The
that?
Well, the
movie
sad
producers
part
need to
about
make
it,
more movies like Black Panther.
Exactly.
there you go.
Right.
Spike Lee, do the right thing. You know what I'm saying? Because believe it or not, our entertainment influences how we roll in our community.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Anybody who sit there and think rationally, oh, that's just entertainment. No, it's not. We look at historically,
It's
if you
education.
want
It's
to see
programming.
fashion trends, it's programming. And
Subliminal
we
messages.
value that.
Yes, subliminal messages.
We
Mhm.
you look at now and you look at every kid, it's amazing. At one point, you know, college enrollments, even among HBCUs, was dropping rapidly because we now, New Jack City and all those movies made the drug dealer the man. You wanted to be out there. Why should I go to school and sit here and try to work hard for the money when I can work these streets and make millions of dollars? But here's the funny thing about it. You know what sent our college kids back to school again? People keep forgetting when School Days came out.
Mm-hmm.
School Days was the movie that made college seem cool again. School Days was the movie that brought back the importance of HBCUs in the Black community. That
And Bill
everybody
Cosby,
wanted to go to H. Yes, sir.
A
Mr.
Different
Cosby
World.
was no joke. Different
Yeah.
world. Different world, and every spin off of that. And then, unfortunately, 2 generations later, we lost it again. Because why? YouTube and social media, every kid, now the biggest thing is to be a rapper.
Yes.
School is like, who want to
Mhm.
waste the time in school when I can get enough followers or I can be a rapper? And again, being a rapper, street creds mean I either got to, you want to be popular, go to jail.
Mhm,
Be a drug dealer, get locked up a couple of times, your popularity is out the roof.
mhm. And I
That's
understand
the
though that,
sad part about it.
right, that
We are back on that negative decline.
right, that what the media is paying for is for this violent criminal rap. That's what the white executives are promoting and paying for,
Exactly.
and that white kids are listening to this and buying it as well, and
Oh, white kids love it. They eat
But
it up.
here's the problem, and I had this discussion years ago. Those rappers, those entertainers, they're not making any money.
Hmm.
What they get is you get somebody who's a promoter who gives you enough money to get you a Ferrari, like this guy just crashed here in Atlanta the other day, or to get you
That
some fancy car.
lifestyle, your front.
In the meantime, they're pocketing the money, and at the end of the day, you don't have a bank account. You don't have any money invested in stock.
Any assets,
And
no real estate.
as soon as the next cute little kid comes along that's got a good voice, that's got a little energy, you're out the door. Unless
Yeah.
you are enterprising like Queen Latifah,
That
LL Cool J, Ice T. These people had a little bit more going on than just what they were doing. But if you're
Mhm.
if your idea of success is I want to be a rapper and I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to get all these hits, you've already destined yourself for failure.
and
Mhm.
let's look at another statistic. Again, back to the elephant in the room. Black on black crime in terms of what we see in our community as far as wanting to be rappers and all. Last year alone, and the most prominent being Nipsey Hussle, there were 25 rappers that were killed in black on black crime last year. Nipsey Hussle was the most prominent.
25, you said 25?
25, the last count I remember. Go to YouTube. They have put in murder rappers or dead rappers. There are 25 rappers that they highlight specifically that were well known or up and coming. YouTube is wonderful for getting affirmation, even better than the uniform crime reports. Why? because this is coming directly from the streets for the people themselves. And yet there's no shortage, male or female, of kids in our community who want to be rappers, specifically gangster rappers. Even though they know the lifespan is short, because you got to shoot somebody or somebody shoot you for your popularity to go through the roof. Again, value systems.
Yeah.
What sense does that make?
So how do we change it all? What do we do? How do we change it?
It goes back to school and teaching. When we talk about parenting or mentoring, it's even better. Mentoring our young people with a sense of you can do better. You don't have to settle for this. There are always so many college scholarships that just go wanting, left behind, wasted.
Yes.
Those opportunities. Now it's to the point where things are changing, where perhaps you can go to a community college for 2 years and at least get your foot in the door to go further, to do great in community college, perhaps get a scholarship to a better University of Michigan, a Howard, or even Princeton or Yale. Those things are available. But as long as we don't teach our kids to aspire to greater, they're always going to settle for the mediocre. And the mediocre are these, I want to be a rapper. Okay, what is the future in being a rapper? There is no future.
If I might interject, I think that a lot of the work I used to do, I'm also a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And yeah, all right. Hey, bye. We do these fraternities, all of them. The fraternities and sororities run different levels of activism, of mentoring programs and visibility programs designed to mobilize people. They got various types of issues. Let me give you a couple examples in a minute. I also was heavily involved and was a president and a national board of director of an organization called National Black NBA Association. It has a program called Leaders of Tomorrow. We mentor kids when they seventh grade, and we get them from seventh grade and we follow them all the way through grad school. And a lot of the kids that we started out in the Washington, D.C. chapter, I've been living here about 10 years, they make more money than I make now, right? and a lot of them have MBAs and PhDs, but when we got them, they were 15 years old, right? And so the mentoring sometimes compensates for the lack of parenting. It gives the kid somebody to kind of cling to, somebody to kind of look to as a role model, but also good information. And so, like, if you tell somebody what you said earlier about the availability of scholarships in Norman, I tell them, well, I never paid a penny to go to college. Mm-hmm. How you go to college for free? I said, you just apply. There's millions of scholarships. I applied. I went to undergrad for free. I got a fellowship from the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management to get my MBA at the University of Michigan. 1 out of 10 chances of getting best and brightest minority. And this is a kid who never took the SAT.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. And so I know it can be done because I did it. And if I could do it, you got more to work with than I had. I had a learning disability. I was taking phenobarbital for years. I had abnormal brain waves. I couldn't even think straight when I was a kid. Okay. And, I had an injury, a concussion and, head injury. Well, anyway, but the point is that they have bought into a systems of belief that's just straight up false. And they have to be given an alternative narrative that is persuasive enough that you can say, not only is what you're saying not true, you meet with me, I'm going to take you to my job where everybody in here makes $200,000 a year, including me. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't look like you have any money. Well, people that have money don't walk around with gold rings and stuff.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, but you don't know that because you've never been around money, wealth, or well-educated people.
Yes. Yes.
You've been around a fantasy on a TV show or a video and I don't even want to talk about the girls, okay? The Instagram models and all those games
Right.
they play. I'm not. I'll let the lady speak on that. I'm not gonna say anything.
And
But-
let's not even talk about fronting on the street, what we call hood rich.
Oh yeah. Well,
you got a
and
Benz living in a project, but you the man.
yeah. I mean, you living at home with your mother. You got a used Mercedes-Benz that somebody stole on the black market, and you bought it cheap, all right?
Mhm.
And you don't make any money. Did you ever read that book, Freakonomics?
Hey. And the sad
Okay, well,
part about it
this is an economist that did an analysis of all kinds of things that we kind of ignore. And one thing this economist did was analyze how much money you can make in the drug trade. You'd make more money working at McDonald's at the street level.
And
Oh, really?
because when you put in the amount of hours on that corner slinging versus what
That's right. And I'm going to tell you something else. In talking about hazard, the risk of getting killed, you are less likely to die on death row waiting for the electric chair than you are hustling on the street.
Unbelievable.
So if you can put the numbers in front of somebody, like you like to work with numbers, I do too, Norman. I like to. I've done some mentoring, and what I do is say, okay, if you do this, there's a 90% chance you're going to end up here. And this will be the outcome. Let's go over here and see and show you a jail cell. Let's show you what it looks like to be a prisoner. Let's take you over here and show you how hard this single mother's life is. Do you want to live like that?
Mhm.
What's wrong with you?
Mhm.
You know?
Absolutely.
And I mean, and so all you got to do is be a good boy. Don't smoke dope. Don't get no girl pregnant, and go to school. That's all you got to do.
Very
And
easy.
you just took away 90% of what most of them aspire to being around the way. See, and
Right.
the funny thing about it, we come back to that value system. It's not cultural, it's not racial, it's not even individual. It's about what is valued in that community you come from. And
I think there's a lot of subliminal. I think the lady mentioned, what is your name again, Penny?
No.
Okay, I'm Dr. Wanzo.
Dr. Wanzo. Wanzo. Sorry about that. You mentioned subliminal seduction. One of my favorite books from way back. It's on my shelf. Okay. There's a whole lot of subliminal programming going on in the Black community.
Yes.
You know, like in military, they have psychological operations. I mean, you spill out property. We see it going on right now. And so if you want to make a population believe certain things, then you kind of feed them that stuff, you know, and just hit them with it. And eventually enough of them. And you got to have a strong enough, compelling counter argument to the propaganda that they're receiving, that what you just heard is not even close to reality.
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no one to offer that alternative narrative, that alternative explanation, that alternative analysis, the only thing they got to go on is this adverse narrative that they're being told. And that's where I'm a big proponent of mentoring programs.
I see.
But it's not the only way to go. But I mean, mentoring, I know for a fact mentoring works. And so I remember one time I mentored a young man who was being abused by his mother when he was in high school, and I worked with him for like 4 years. He ended up getting a master's degree in engineering, graduating with high honors. And one day after I let him go, I mean, he was like in high school living at home because he couldn't live with his mother because she was an alcoholic and she was violent, right? And years later, I saw this very handsome, young, tall man walking down the street with a suit. He came to me, Mr. Reeves, you don't remember me, but I'm such and such, and you worked with me for several years, and I want to thank you for that. And I had to look at him hard to remember who he was. But this man had a master's degree in electrical engineering. That is not easy to do.
Wow.
And from the University of Pittsburgh, because I lived in Pittsburgh for 23 years. And so all I did was I took him to the Society of Engineers luncheon. I took him around all the engineers that I knew because I knew that's what he wanted to do. I talked to him about the career. I did the career research with him. I showed him. I gave him a game plan to follow. I said, you could do this. Anybody can do this. You just have to apply yourself, you know, and you can do it, and you will overcome these things, and you will do it. And then one day you'll be making enough money. You can help your mother if you want to.
Wow.
So You got to give them an alternative argument.
Yeah.
You got to give them an alternative narrative. That's my point.
Alternative narrative. I like that. Alternative narrative.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, I mean, this is your guys' show. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but you only got 4 or 5 people calling in, so I said I got to say a couple of things here. But one of the things that also I want to say is that Professor, you mentioned also personal responsibility. I use a slightly different word. I call it agency. I believe that because we have such a history, legitimate history of being enslaved and oppressed and Jim Crow and all of these systemic racist schemes against us to marginalize us and keep us in a de facto state of psychological and economic slavery long after slavery ended. What has happened is that we have internalized white supremacy and black inferiority ourselves, such that the victim mindset, the victim mentality basically says, I cannot control my destiny. I can't do anything about it. I mean, I have to have a white liberal to rescue me.
Exactly.
I need a program from the government to save me. And yeah, you do need programs because you do need help. Every group got help. The white people got all kinds of free land from the government back in the 19th century. So sure, okay, but taking responsibility means you are in control of the decisions that you make, not your externalities. Okay, that's what I call agency. And so if you want to get out of the ghetto, first of all, you got to kind of reframe your thinking as to whether or not you even live in a ghetto. Wait, exactly what does it mean to live in a ghetto? Is this house a ghetto too? You know, is my bedroom a ghetto? Is my mind a ghetto?
It's my mind. Everything is my mind.
Yeah, I mean, so like one of the things that I did, people talk about role models. There weren't a whole lot of black role models in the 70s doing anything. We just started to see black people move into prominence, just the beginning of it. My role models were white. I read The Count of Monte Cristo. Edmond Dantes was my hero. James T. Kirk, Captain Kirk, Starship Enterprise. I talked like William Shatner. I acted like William Shatner. I spoke like William Shatner. and Mr. Spock, and Mr. Spock, I ended up taking my philosophy elective in honor of Leonard Nimoy's character, Mr. Spock, logic, and I got an A in that thing.
See there?
Yes, sir.
Syllogistic logic, Aristotelian logic. That's supposed to be one of the hardest courses. Well, I aced it. All right. And once again, the kid who never took the SAT. So
did you take emotion out of your rationality?
Well, neither did Spock. He's half human. But
yeah.
But where I'm going with that is that a lot of times we're waiting for a black role model. And one time, I mean, I escaped into books.
Gotcha.
And so I imagined that I was the hero in the book. I mean, I imagined that I was some guy in the movie. What would this character do? And what did Tom Hanks do in Castaway? How did Edmond Dantes escape the prison? You know? He hid in a body bag and they threw him into the ocean. He escaped. He pretended like he was dead. That's how he got out. And so
young generation reads, you know, it's like for them TV fast. I mean, growing up, like we went to I had my library card when I was 4 and we went to the library every weekend. I mean, that's our generation. So I don't know about these kids today as far as reading.
There you go. I mean, I'm in here in my apartment right now, going through my books. This is the first novel I ever read in my life. I was 7 years old. I'm looking at it right now. I was a Cub Scout. Boys Life library book, Mutiny in the Time Machine, a thrilling science fiction story of 4 adventurous scouts at their travels through time. Now, I read this when I was 7 years old.
Gotcha.
I'm holding the exact book in my hand that I read when I'm 63 now.
You were also in the Scouts too. It sounds like you were in the Boy Scouts.
Right. Once again, you're in the right stuff. And so we all had these activities. And see, these kids, they don't have anything to do. And I think part of the problem is there's no money for these after-school programs. you know,
You guys
and then
keep
you got a
talking,
lot
give
of
me a moment.
disinterested parents.
Step away just a second.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I agree with these mentor programs. There's 100 Black men, the fraternities are doing mentoring programs. I mean, all of these are necessary. And you mentioned the PAL program. I don't know if that still exists. Someone said that it exists. It's strong in Milwaukee, but not in Atlanta. It was strong in Atlanta in the 80s, but we need these types of programs. And I like what Paula said as far as the alternative narrative. Exactly.
Mhm.
What's your name, caller? By the way, what's your name?
My name is Charles Reeves, Reaves.
Boy, I'm so glad you called in. You've been so helpful.
I'm also known as the Foundry Man's son
Yes.
on Facebook.
Oh,
Now, Norman knows that
Yes.
because my father worked at the Buick Motor Foundry pouring metal for 40 years. So,
Wow.
but listen, I don't want to dominate the discussion, although we've had a good, I'm going to be quiet and let somebody else say something, but, and I'll get back on the screen and just kind of watch you guys talk. But those are the things that was on my mind. And I think you're doing very good work. You just have more dialogue, and people just need to kind of remember what made us successful. We've lost our way,
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you had great input to the conversation. You really added a lot of flavor. I appreciate your calling.
Yes, thank you
Well,
so much. So we look
You're
forward
welcome.
to hearing from you in the future too, as well.
Well, you're on my connection list, so the next time you have a live, like a watch party or something, I'm going to get flagged by you. So
Okay.
I'll make sure I participate.
Okay, great. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Good talking to you.
Take care, Charles.
All right.
All
right, bye-bye.
I really like his insights and his points. Really, really good. So I really appreciate his calling in. So this has really been very intense, and I'm so glad that we're dealing with it. What's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think getting into the whole repetitive theme and throughout all this seems to be that it's rooted in self-esteem. It starts with mentoring and parenting, and it just grows. It just grows from there. Great stuff.
Yes. Let's see, any other Facebook comments? Someone said,
Well,
slavery did not end. It changed form to inmates. That's true.
right.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that you're going to see in the future is that laws and policies are going to change, because right now, if you get in the system, and I'm talking about in the prison system, your life is blackballed forever, depending on what type of crime you've committed, because your opportunities become limited. And I think that in the next few years, you're going to see that change, because there are people who have gone in and served their time in prison, and they're redeemable. But in order to be fully redeemed, you not only have to do the repentance and serving your penitence in prison, but to be fully redeemed, you have to become able to come out and be a part of that society. And when you're denied that opportunity, that again, that's going to just push you back to where you don't want to go.
Wow.
It's just great. But one of the things that if I could get in, just mention this before we get out, and it goes into self-esteem. One of the things that I've been hearing lately from millennials, hate to point you guys out, is through many of my conversations on Facebook and social media, is that whatever you guys did, it didn't get us where we needed to be. And I just have to offer this one comment on that. And Paul, you might appreciate that. And I had to write this out because I wouldn't have remembered it. But if your parents or grandparents spit on police and threw rocks at them, they would have been killed by the mobs or by the police. There would be no civil rights Act, which is the template for all civil rights policies to this very day. There would have been no Voters' Rights Act. King would have probably been killed a whole lot earlier, because you have this false courage where you're supposed to be peacefully demonstrating to improve your community, but you take that opportunity, the cowardly opportunity, to go spit in a cop's face, and knowing that he's not going to move but stand there. You throw rocks and firecrackers at the cops, knowing that the most that's going to happen to you is they might chase you away. And that's like little kids throwing and breaking somebody's window and then running and laughing about it. It's real childish mentality that's not going to benefit us. It's not going to get us anywhere. It's not going to get us anywhere. So rather than criticizing on what you think were the shortcomings of your grandparents and your great-grandparents, you need to look back on those people and the efforts they made and the courage they had to do what they do, because most of the time they were facing death doing what they did. And you need to go back and take a little bit from their playbook and put that in your playbook in order for us to make any progress, whether it's going to be with improving policing or just improving life in your community.
Wow. Any more comments, Paul? Oh, Paul's on mute. Paul, you're on mute. He's on mute. Yeah. Yeah. We can't hear Paul.
There
Can
you
you
go.
hear me now?
Yeah, you're on mute. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how that happened. You know, I'm still, you know, electronically challenged. But I had to plug in to keep the power going. But Norman is absolutely right. I have witnessed so many acts of, shall I say, just outright defiantness that's stupid. I work in the field on the ground level, the front lines of all these riots and demonstrations in Atlanta. And let me tell you, 90% of the people in the last month that I've been out there in the front line have been amazing. Different backgrounds, religions, racial groups, but that 10% are hardcore criminals who have used the peaceful demonstrations as a smokescreen to commit crimes that they were doing. And especially in the Wendy shooting, University and Pryor. Those in that community, those small little isolated radical pockets of, shall I say, radicals, they were victimizing Blacks who lived in the neighborhood. This is where Black on Black crime was highly exaggerated, to the point where I witness it every day. These so-called Black leaders, criminal element, who are taking over intersections just to sit there and say they can. Between the weed smoking and the openly alcoholic, they kept false, shall I say, perceptions of who they are, and heightened acts of brazenness because there's little to no police presence, really gave them an impression that they were running things. And that's where the mistake was made upon the leaders, the local, shall I say, the political leaders, because they should have been the first to say, hey, lawlessness and this, how should I say, criminal activity won't be tolerated, regardless of what the atmosphere is. We should have cracked down on it. No, we don't have to be brutal. We don't have to have pit bulls. We don't have to have SWAT team. We don't have to have even dogs out there. What we should have had was a presence. A presence that when acts were committed, especially by those under influence of alcohol or drugs, they were immediately arrested and taken to custody. Because at this point, we allowed so much to happen that had nothing to do with peaceful demonstrating. Now we trying to fix the looting. Now we're trying to fix the damage. Now we're trying to fix the loss of life. Do you realize 2 of these groups have fights and shootings among themselves that sent so-called demonstrators of their own groups to the hospital?
Right, because
alcohol and drugs have a lot to do with it.
People from the neighborhood have taken up arms and barricading streets and preventing people from entering. Even my son had an incident. He was there filming and some guys almost assaulted him and he just barely escaped when he was down there.
Well, you know what's happening on the news today is that people and businesses are now talking about moving out of Atlanta because of what's going on right now, because no one feels safe. And it's not only affecting Atlanta proper, but the surrounding suburban communities like Milton and other places in Fulton County. Because what happens is when businesses move into Atlanta, if that's the hub, their employees are coming from other parts of the country and they're going to places like live in places like Fulton County and Milton and other places. So this affects the lifeblood of metropolitan Atlanta. And if we don't put a stop to it soon, you're going to lose. You know, Atlanta was once called the New York of the South, which really is not a compliment, but if you know New York.
You're right.
I lived in New York for a number of years.
The progress of the last 15, 20 years have been staggering. You know, you got to remind yourself Atlanta's still in the deep South, but to see the progress, the quality of life for so many those who were part of that cycle has just exploded above and beyond economic means they could imagine.
Mhm.
But we still have that segment of our community who will always be detrimental to us as a race. Going back to the use of the N-word, going back to Black on Black violence, going back to the lack of respect for others' lives, education, progression, they're there. And unfortunately, they're the ones who get the most media coverage, as well as it continues to make us all look like animals.
Yep.
Individually, we may be achieving, but as a race, sometimes it looks like we're digressing.
Wow.
Well, a lot of it has
All
to
it takes
do.
is a few to make us all look bad. I'm
Right.
sure we all understand that.
We need to just be more careful of who we throw our allegiances behind.
Absolutely.
That's also an issue, because it's not only an issue for us adults, but your children are looking at what you do and what you support and how you react to certain situations. And that's determining how they view things in the future. And that's how this cycle persists.
Exactly. Yes.
Absolutely. You know,
Sounds we have a lot of work to do in our community. We have a lot of work, but we need to do it. It's important work that we need to take on.
but that's the funny thing about it. It's like Norman said, or the other gentleman said, we're looking for external America, in most cases, white America, to fix our communities. That's the part that really bugs me out. We elect political leaders that look like us to help make that process happen. The majority of them do just the opposite. We need to start policing ourselves so we no longer have fear of police departments. And that's the bottom line.
What do you mean policing ourselves? What do you mean?
Going back again, discipline starts at home, being responsible for each other. It used to still, it's the statement that it takes a village to raise a child. Is that still valid?
Yes, yes.
All right, then. You know, if you had one grandma on the block, she was everybody's grandma. You know, no matter how, when I was growing up, how much of a thug you think you were on the street, you still had the respect for the senior citizens. You had respect for the grandmothers and to me, that's the basis. All stakeholders, get police departments back to community policing, get religious leaders back into the community and be religious leaders and not celebrities. Again, I said it a million times, make politicians do their job. And how we do that, tell them if they're not doing what we're electing to do that's good for everybody to better our community, then we will take you out of office. Don't let them get in there and get it comfortably become incumbents. because the longer they stay, the more incompetent most of them are. Bad politicians are also destroying the Black community.
Paul, I got a question to ask you. When
Yes,
we
sir.
were years ago, as a police officer, there were certain businesses that had us come in and sign logs in their businesses. And that was a way of where you had to park and get out of the car. You go in and sign your log, put your name and your time and date on there, and you leave. Are they still doing that? Or do they do
Not
that
even
here in
remotely.
Atlanta?
Not even remotely. I
Because
don't know.
that would be a great thing, because that gets you out of the car. That gets you interacting with the business people and with the people in the community.
Someone said
And you
there's
know,
a
the sad
difference. Someone said there's a
and-
difference between a politician and a public servant. Someone made that
Oh
comment.
yeah. Yes.
well,
Yes.
let me address what Norman just said for a second, because Norman really, and it's funny you should say that, because Norman, you know as well as I do, officers are lazy as hell. Let's just be honest with you.
Right.
As a whole, are lazy as hell. And the fact that they have to come and sign a log to say they even went to a business, that was equivalent to a night watchman who had to take a time clock around, you know, in a
But
factory or wherever they work.
but that was mandatory. That was
That
mandatory
was
that you do that. So that goes back to leadership. That goes back to community support and community interaction.
Yep.
You have to get rid of this mentality that makes the
Us
cop
against
the
them.
enemy. That makes the
Yeah.
cop the enemy. You got to get rid of that. Those people who are selling that never have your community as the benefit your community. You got to get rid of
And
that.
you know the sad part about it, to institute community policing on a very basic of what it is, most community leaders and whatever their whether the mayors or whatever, most of them won't support that. They will talk all day about police reforms or what they're going to do as candidates, but when they come in, the first thing they start telling is excuses why this wasn't able. Police departments were designed to serve and protect. That's our first job.
Exactly.
Somehow we got into two phases of law enforcement that that I recognize in my career that I can't see how the cycle's going to be broken. The first phase, policing for profit, which is tickets and citations, because it's a money maker for any jurisdiction or community. The second, that us against them mentality has always been perpetrated as, oh, well, we got to go out there and protect our own. I have yet to see a police department that has a factory or a secret lab where they create their offices. Law enforcement personnel are still part of a community, whether it's the one they police or wherever the one that came from, the police in that jurisdiction. And again, community policing begins, like Norman said. We shouldn't have to mandate these guys get out the cars and go into business and sign a book. What we should mandate is at this point now that once we start assigning you to districts or beats or areas that you work, that you start getting to know people in that community. No, we ain't telling you sit up in the living room, you go socialize, and you're not answering your radio because you get to know all the females on the block or whoever's attractive. That means you go into the businesses. You may prevent crime sometimes just by being around a car park there and start walking. Where you working in a mall area or a retail area, park the car and walk. You'd be amazed not only how the presence of an officer walking may deter crime, but you got too many out of shape officers.
Unfortunately, we're over time and we do have to end. This has been a really wonderful, lively discussion, and we will have to continue this discussion. We will let you notify when the next show, but we will definitely have to continue discussion. I want to thank everybody, the caller, our co-host, our guest, for a wonderful show. Thank you so much. And we thank our listening audience, and we will be notifying you when the next show will be, where we will continue this very necessary discussion. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.